Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to our little session on how to get started on an SAP data privacy journey. Just a quick upfront, we are quite tight for time today, and it is a session that usually I have a little bit more time for. So some of the slides we may have to skip over quite quickly, but those slides will be available obviously after this session. At the end of the session, there will be some limited amount of time for questions. So without further ado, as they say, let's crack on into the agenda. So we'll tell you a little bit about who we are, who Proceed are, and then we'll just get into looking at how SAP have provided, what do you do on an SAP project to meet the data protection legislation, and to be clear, SAP provide tools not just for GDPR, which is obviously the thing that's most of interest to people in UK and Europe, but there is the data protection tool set that covers most country-specific legal requirements, hence how we try to refer to data protection legislation in this presentation, not just referring to GDPR. So we'll talk a little bit about what the recommended approach is for this type of project. We will then jump into some of the data protection tools and services that SAP provide, and indeed some of the tools that Proceed have developed. And then we'll have a little slide on how Telia, one of our customers that we implemented for, how they used SAP ILM, which is the main GDPR and data protection tool. So just a quick couple of slides on Proceed. Proceed are an archiving and decommissioning and content management company. We have been doing that for a very long time, but probably it's safe to say that the GDPR side of the business came in relatively recently, as did GDPR, of course. So we're gold partners with SAP, and we've implemented for many customers right across the world and right across different industry sectors. And we are also that Silver Services partner with OpenText as well. So meaning that we do have that ability in the not just for structured data, but for unstructured data like documents as well. So just there, some of the customers that you can see that we've worked with over the last few years. I'm just trying to pick out anyone on there that been a particular project of mine, but obviously you can see there's some pretty big names on there: Coca-Cola, AB InBev, and such like. So you can see that we've worked with some quite large organizations and across all types of different industry sector. So coming on to some of the customers for this subject, obviously we're talking about data compliance projects. There's some of the people that we've worked with recently. So Gloucestershire County Council, Royal Mail, for instance. So yeah, it's becoming more and more common that we're getting customers coming to us and asking us how they can make their SAP system compliant. So that's hence why obviously we're on the subject for this presentation, so that we can sort of cover off some of the tools that SAP have provided. And a lot of these tools are quite new, and even where they're not particularly new, there has been a lot of change to them in recent years. So there's a lot to take in terms of a project and how to plan that project. So how do we get started? That's the first question. What we quite commonly find is there is straight away with a data protection compliance project an issue around everybody understanding what compliance means. Now, it's definitely worth me saying in relation to this slide that's in front of you. So these are some of the principles of GDPR. Now, the principles in themselves are relatively sensible. The problem we have on these projects is that the interpretation of these principles are very different customer to customer. And the way that, for instance, one customer will define a data minimization requirement to be compliant from one customer to another is proving to be very different. We as Proceed are not legal experts in GDPR. We are experts implementing to a requirement. And one of the things that's really important in a project is to get that legal advice and to get that data governance advice from your data protection officer. And if they need to go away and also talk to legal experts in data protection and GDPR, then that is greatly recommended before you embark on a project. You, as an organization, need to know what compliance means. Otherwise, you're clearly going to have a very difficult time implementing a compliance solution when you're not actually sure what compliance is. This may seem like a really obvious thing to say, but I would unfortunately say that a number of projects I've worked on over the last couple of years, this has been one of the key issues that we have come across on the project and has caused enormous problems. Equally, at the start of the project, based on that understanding of what compliance means, it's a whole organization understanding of what problem is trying to be solved. So although SAP is part of that, there will be other systems that SAP is related to or out there in the landscape, maybe holding duplicates of the information, there may be reporting systems, etc. And it's understanding the whole business case and the whole problem is very, very important, not just looking at SAP in isolation. And what is critical, as it says on that slide there, is understanding who the sponsors are and connecting with the users. It's very easy to get to come at it from a technical perspective and miss that business case, that sponsorship. And during the project, that's going to cause you a big problem if you haven't got those sponsors involved and you haven't connected with those users. Again, we have had customers we've worked with who come at it from a technical perspective. When the users have seen the solution, they haven't liked what they've seen. That's why it's important to get the users on board and involved at a very early stage. And by users, I'm talking about the people who are actually using the data owners, the day-to-day users, those people who are going to notice when this data is not there anymore. They need to be bought into what the project is trying to do. And in that, it's understanding the bigger process and the user journey, the whole context. Basically, understand the bigger picture is extremely important. If you don't do that, you are giving yourself a very big risk that the organization won't be bought into what you're doing, and that removing data from the system, for instance, or blocking it it's problematic getting that live because the organization starts to understand the data is missing and doesn't agree that perhaps it should be missing. Once you've got that wider context and you've done that foundation work, it's about getting things in place for the project. And again, it's really just normal project planning. This is all about how to set a project up. It should come as no real surprise what's on this slide. But the problem is this is still causing us problems with our projects. So again, it's about really thinking about this before you embark on a project and before you probably even engage with Proceed, although we do help with that type of understanding and that type of engagement with your resources and your stakeholders. But it's really getting that foundation in place again about making sure the users are ready, that you've got the right stakeholders, that you've got the right understanding, etc., of the regulations and the people who are going to be affected by the project. We would recommend always having some sort of discovery report and some implementation recommendations. That's something that Proceed have worked with customers to create, and that can help with your stakeholder buy-in, so that we work with the customer to outline what it is that you're trying to do, how do we intend to do it in SAP, and what would be the result of the project. Sometimes that result can actually be even more wide-ranging and better than the customer had originally thought, because quite often a project like this will result in a smaller database, for instance, and maybe that wasn't one of the initial aims of the project, but actually it's an additional thing that has come out of the project, and there's that helps with the cost benefit in some cases, because obviously GDPR compliance in itself is not going to give you a cost benefit, but by reducing the database, that may well mean that you can offset or even match the costs of the project by the savings that you're going to get from the project. I'm not going to go into this slide in great detail, but it's important to get the right stakeholders in on the project. Particularly, I'd call out the third one down there, which is your data governance, the data protection team. You absolutely have to engage with your data protection officer and get the buy-in from them and get their viewpoint on what compliance means. As you can see there, though, there is a whole list of people who we would recommend you to have in this type of project. So it's quite wide-ranging in terms of the people you might be affecting. Another one that's sometimes missed, for instance, is the reporting, people who are doing reporting. You ask the data owner, when do you need data? They say, oh, I don't need it after a certain point in time. And then you talk to people who do corporate reporting and they say, actually, we need it for a longer time than that. So don't miss any of these people would be my recommendation. So what is our recommended approach? We really recommend a very detailed analysis phase. So the way you set up a project for implementation of SAP functionality is no different to any other project for SAP functionality. You're going to have a period where you are going to prepare for the project. Then you're going to have some sort of explore phase where you're going to build a design or an analysis phase, as we've called it here. And then you're going to jump into the build and then release the functionality. This analysis phase should not be underestimated. We again have had projects which have immediately stalled because the analysis phase has not had the right stakeholders, or because in the analysis phase has not been able to identify what the data retention policies are or the data blocking policies are. And in some cases, it has taken many months to get to that answer. What we would recommend is obviously you do as much work as possible up front on that retention schedule, that you work with data governance and data owners to really understand what data is being used for and why you are keeping the data or why people would be able to see that data. That groundwork will then allow you to implement the rules that you need to implement, either to block data, to remove it entirely, to archive it perhaps. But until you ask those questions and you get all of those key stakeholders we've just been talking about, you're not going to know the answer. And you're going to end up in workshops where the question will be, well, okay, how long do you want to keep this type of data? And the answer will be, we don't know. And clearly you cannot move a project forward until that answer is, you've got that answer. So this type of analysis phase is critical before you jump in there and start actually trying to deliver anything. Otherwise, you're really going to struggle to get the right answer that comes for the implementation phase. So the key deliverables, you would end up with a blueprint, as you'd expect, or some sort of solution document, and that would be signed off. People say, yes, we agree with how this should be built. The impact on business process is also sometimes missed. Removing data from a system or blocking it is definitely going to affect business processes. You will have to either change business processes, or you might need new business processes. Or at the very least, an existing business process will be affected by the fact that data is no longer accessible in some cases. Those impacts should not be underestimated, and really it's about understanding where the data is used in a process so that you can say, well, we're removing this type of data, for instance, or blocking it. We know where that data is used in the process, and we therefore know where the process impact might be. And that's critical, again, to the success of a project. That's what you do in this analysis phase, so that you can then prepare the users of the business process for those new processes or those changed processes. And you can do that then during the implementation phase as part of your change management. And it goes without saying that good project planning will lead to a successful project. Again, it seems like a really obvious thing to say, and it is an obvious thing to say, but I cannot reiterate the importance of good project planning for this type of project. We try and use an activate type approach, so we're looking at the different phases, and we do sort of quality gates between phases to see whether we're ready to go into the next phase. And that's the sort of approach I would absolutely recommend that is implemented on this type of project. That you check that you're ready to go into the next phase using that type of quality gate approach. A quick important question that for every project that's starting like this is this going to cost me any money? Now, the main tool that we're using in this solution for data protection is the ILM toolset, which is Information Lifecycle Management. Now, the toolset from SAP does have a licensing cost. However, if you're only using it to be legally compliant, it is available for free. However, if you're using the free version, you have a limited amount of functionality that you can use. And the critical thing about the free version is there is no storage option. So you cannot archive data with the free version of ILM. You can only remove it from the system. Moving into a situation where you want to actually archive the data as well, that would be where there would be an ILM fee. And anything that you're using the functionality for that isn't for a legislative compliance reason for data protection, that is again where the fee for ILM comes in. So this is it's important to understand the project at the start and to understand those limitations. If you try and use the free version, it is our experience that it's very difficult for a customer to achieve all of their requirements using the free version. It's certainly not impossible, but it is very difficult. So what's the tool set that we're looking at? Let's have a look at some of the things that are in the box. So the first thing that we're going to just look at here is we've got certain tools that are in the box depending on the basically that what we sometimes refer to as the temperature of the data. So we've got that little thermometer on the left-hand side there. You know, what we're looking at is hot data is something that is business critical, something that people need on a day-to-day basis, maybe on an hour-to-hour basis. And then we start getting the data starts getting a bit cooler. In that this is data it's more historical, it's not used as often, it's not used perhaps in corporate reporting, it's maybe just point queries. And then we finally get to that cold data that's completely meaningless. So redundant data, often a lot of technical data falls into this, but also master data and personal data does as well. And that would be meaningless data. So that live data, it's in live, we need it. We can use some authorization control to say who has access to it. We could choose to mask or block it if we needed to, but it's got to stay in the live database. Then we get to historical data, which would be archived, or you can mask and block it. And then when you get to that meaningless data, you would be looking at destroying it. So some of the actions there, in live, you can do some things around performance optimization. You can look and make sure that you've got things in place to ensure you've got your service level agreements you can still meet. You can do things with authorizations. Then the historical data, looking at storage, for instance, for archiving, and policies for masking or blocking. And then at the bottom there, some sort of automation or destruction policies in place. SAP's tools, they rely on a concept called end of purpose. And those end of purpose checks are based on different criteria on the data. And one of the things you need to be a little bit careful of is they differ between data types. In some cases, end of purpose is when data has been archived. In some cases, end of purpose would be when data has a deletion flag set on it. In other cases, you may actually have a closure reason. So you may say that this particular transaction type is now closed. It's been dealt with. It's now finished. So workflow item, for instance, when it's completed or cancelled, that is its end of purpose. And finally, we have things like employees. When an employee leaves the organization, that is it can be used as a point at which to recognize end of purpose. So you wouldn't necessarily say it's exactly the point that they leave, but it's maybe several years after they leave, but you're looking for the date they left, and that's how you're working out the end of purpose. From a data protection point of view, you've usually got two types of purpose. You've probably got a primary purpose that you collected the data for and that you've told people that you're using the data for, and then you've got a full end of purpose where there's no justifiable reason to keep the data and you need to get rid of it. I know I'm running short on time, so I'm going to start running through these slides a little bit quicker, but there could be legal or organizational requirements. So that's what this slide is summarizing. And just be aware that you need to think about the linked systems and backups and training systems and interfaced systems, not just the SAP system itself, because all of those systems need to have policies around the data. And if you've deleted or blocked data in the or masked it or redacted it in the master system, then you should really be thinking about, well, how do we take that out to the downstream system? And what happens if an upstream system tries to send data to the SAP system, but the data's been removed? So there's all those sorts of things that you need to think about, that interconnected architecture to understand the full impact. I'm not going to go into this slide in huge detail. This is something that you can have a look at later, but we've talked about, for instance, the archiving that's available. There's blocking and destruction, but we also have some things in the tool set that are protecting data. So we have these things called retention policies, which means that you can't destroy data before a certain point in time using the ILM tools. You have things called legal hold, where you can say, okay, the general rule for this data is it's destroyed after 6 years, but for this particular person, I need to keep the data. And we also have things called like destruction veto, where a CRM system, for instance, still needs the data and tells the ECC system not to delete the data because the CRM system still needs it. One of the things I will pick out of here is the second item on the list here, which is a redaction of data. So redaction is about, okay, the data is still in the data, is moved from the database to a particular safe place, and what you see in the database instead is just a redacted sort of set of X's, for instance. That's a proceed set of tools that are available that we've developed. It's not something that's SAP standard, but it's something that Proceed have developed. Form of data blocking, basically. It's a way of removing data from day-to-day use, but it's still there effectively in the database. So lastly, let's look at the data breaches. So this isn't strictly speaking ILM, but there are some tools in the box that are available that try and keep, so you can understand how to keep data safe and if there's been a breach. So there are some things that you should think about in terms of breaches, particularly around access to things like SE16 or SE16N. Direct access to tables is quite a dangerous thing for users to have, or at least it should be monitored by something like Firefighter for live data. A lot of organizations allow people to download data to Excel. Well, you've got to be really careful with that, because that means you've got an unrestricted copy of real life data that's out there outside of SAP now and is uncontrolled. You can also look at masking data. You can look at UI logging, so to see who's looked at data, and you can make sure your security model is fit for purpose. So that's just your normal security and authorizations, but quite often you'll find that organizations have roles that give too much access. and especially in an organization that's been live for a long time, that can be a particular problem that should really be revisited. Just a little thing there about UI logging. You can see there's an info type. Normally SAP doesn't log who looks at an info type, it only logs who's changed it, and UI logging would allow you to see who's looked at personal data. So you can see there that sort of example of what the what is being done, and on the right hand side there what the report looks like. UI masking, it is an add-on, it is extra cost, but there is a masking solution from SAP. It works in the different UIs as well, in WebDimpro, UI5, Fury, and in the backend GUI. But it is an extra cost, so you're aware, but it is there, and it does, as you can see there, allow you to mask data. The redaction tool that we have from Proceed does a similar thing, but it's actually moving the data completely out of the database. So it's not strictly speaking UI masking, that's more redaction, whereas this is the data still there in the database, it's just the UI has masked the data. So lastly, quickly, just onto Telia. It was a blocking project, and it was over 7 months. And really, it was about trying to address their CRM and S/4HANA systems. And by implementing the blocking solution, it was a way of protecting data for customers, vendors, and business partners that had reached their end of purpose. It means that they could keep the data because they didn't want to remove it, but it meant the data was put beyond the normal use. And in that case allowed them to keep the data for people who still needed to report on it, but was much more strict control over who could have access to it. So I'm aware I've done very slightly over. Apologies for that, but I think we probably do have just enough time for a few questions if there are any.
Thank you, Chris. We've got one question, so that means you had a thorough presentation there. Question is, migrating to S4, what's the recommended procedure? Would you do it before or after the migration?
We would recommend doing it before a migration. The cleaner the database is when you go to S4, the easier the migration is going to be. So really we want to look at not just from a GDPR point of view or a data protection point of view, but really from the holistic archiving point of view is what data can be removed before you make that journey into S4. Not just is the migration going to be easier, but the smaller your database is in S4, there are cost bands within S4, and the smaller your database is, the cheaper it's going to be. So again, it makes a lot of sense to try and embark on a data cleaning program before you make that journey into S4, if only to make your migration easier.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, so no more questions. So call it a day here, and thank you for attending, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.